Emma had always been drawn to the kind of places most people avoided: the old, the abandoned, the mysterious corners of the world that carried stories whispered in fear. So when she suggested a trip to Blackwood Hollow for Halloween weekend, her friends didn't protest much, though they all had that unspoken, uneasy feeling she was brushing aside. The drive itself set the tone. Winding back roads disappeared into a thick, almost tangible mist that clung to the forest like a ghostly shroud. The trees arched overhead, gnarled and skeletal, their twisted branches scraping against one another as if conspiring in silent warning. Emma pressed the camera to her face, capturing the eerie silhouettes that seemed to sway in a rhythm dictated by some unseen force. By the time they reached the outskirts of the town, even the bravest of her friends felt a chill crawling up their spines. Blackwood Hollow was more than empty. It was abandoned in the way that seemed unnatural. Not a single car rolled along the cracked roads, no flickering streetlights, no laughter or signs of life, only the low hum of the wind threading through the skeletal trees. Emma parked the car, and the moment she stepped out, she felt it, a weight pressing down on her chest, like the world itself was holding its breath. Her friends clustered together, shivering, exchanging uneasy glances, their phones illuminating anxious faces. "Are we even supposed to be here?" one of them muttered, but Emma didn't answer. She had seen it before: the house at the edge of town. It wasn't large, but it dominated the street in the most insidious way. Its windows were dark, streaked with grime, but faint, almost imperceptible light flickered behind the glass. The paint was peeling in long, curling strips, revealing the rotted wood beneath. A single swing of the front gate squealed with a mournful note in the quiet. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, and yet she couldn't move away. Her friends tried to call her back, but Emma had already crossed the yard, drawn to the house like a moth to flame. The fog seemed to thicken around her, wrapping her in icy fingers that made the hairs on the back of her neck rise. As she reached the porch, the door creaked open on its own. A cold gust of air greeted her, carrying a scent she couldn't place: old wood, damp earth, and something faintly metallic, like rusted blood. Her heart began to pound, and a shiver ran down her spine. But curiosity, stubborn and relentless, pushed her inside. The floorboards groaned under her weight as she stepped into the dim interior. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of her vision, stretching and twitching as if alive. The air was thick and cold, heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something she instinctively knew was wrong. Her flashlight beam trembled as it swept across the room. Dust motes floated like tiny ghosts, illuminated in the narrow cone of light. Old portraits lined the walls, their subjects' eyes dark and accusing, some smeared, as if tears had left streaks in the paint. Emma's stomach tightened. She could almost hear the whispering, soft, distant, teasing her ears, like a voice she couldn't quite understand, beckoning her deeper. "Emma, come on." Her friends' voices called from the porch, hesitant and strained. Panic pricked at the edges of her mind, but she didn't respond. Every instinct told her she should leave, yet another, more insistent force pushed her forward. The house seemed to pulse around her, alive with anticipation. She moved toward a narrow hallway leading down to the basement. The air grew colder with each step, frost crawling across her arms. Her flashlight flickered as if struggling against some unseen presence. The basement door was low and heavy, its wood splintered and warped. As she reached for the handle, she felt a vibration run through the floor, subtle at first, then stronger, like a heartbeat beneath the house itself. She paused, the whispering rising into a barely audible chorus. Then, just as she pulled the door open, the sound stopped. The silence hit her like a physical blow, deafening in its intensity. She swallowed hard, every nerve in her body straining against the fear that was both thrilling and paralyzing. The basement was a narrow, Claustrophobic space. The walls lined with ancient stones, cold and damp. Symbols were etched into the rock-sharp, angular marks that seemed to writhe when she looked away. Some were painted with something dark, sticky, and unforgiving. But it wasn't just the symbols. The shadows themselves seemed to have weight, pressing in from every corner. She could feel them sliding along the edges of her vision, impossibly fast, and yet never fully visible. The whispering returned, now a susurration that threaded through her thoughts, promising dark secrets, warning her not to go further. Emma stepped carefully, her boots echoing in the hollow space. Each sound felt magnified, like the house itself was listening. Then she saw a movement in the corner. Not human, not entirely. A shadow flickered, elongated, twisting, and Emma froze. She wanted to call out, to run, but the fear rooted her in place. It was watching her, and in that watching, she felt something she couldn't name. A profound wrongness that made her stomach knot and her limbs heavy. A sudden creak made her spin around. The basement stairs behind her groaned, and she realized the front door above them had slammed shut. Her friends' voices, panicked and shouting, were muffled by the walls, unable to reach her. Emma's breath came in sharp, visible clouds in the freezing air. The shadows shifted closer, and she could now feel it, not just see it. The temperature plummeted further, her teeth chattering. Something cold brushed against her arm, just barely, but enough to make her flinch. Her camera slipped from her grip, landing on the stone floor with a hollow thud. The flash went off accidentally, casting one bright, violent light across the basement. And in that instant, Emma saw it clearly. The shadowed figure had no face, only a darkness that seemed to devour light. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, almost impossible, yet deliberate, watching, studying. The whispers surged louder in her mind, urgent and incomprehensible, like a chant meant to lure her into something she didn't understand but could feel. Viscerally, that it was dangerous. She stumbled backward, nearly falling, the cold pressing harder now, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Panic surged, and she scrambled to the stairs, every nerve screaming at her to get out. But the basement wasn't just a room. It was a trap. The shadows shifted, and the whispers turned into words, snippets she could almost understand. Fragmented and cruel. Go back. You belong here. Forever. Emma's hands trembled on the railing. The moment stretched unbearably. The silence of the house punctuated only by her ragged breathing and the distant, echoing whispers that seemed to follow her, threading into her thoughts. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Something about the house, about Blackwood Hollow, felt alive, aware, and entirely unyielding. She realized she couldn't just leave, not yet. Something demanded she see more, that she uncover the secrets hidden in the shadows. And as she stood at the edge of the basement stairs, frozen in fear and anticipation, the house seemed to close in around her. Outside, the mist swallowed the town, but inside, Blackwood Hollow was alive, patient, and hungry for the curiosity that had brought her here. Emma's heart raced. She knew, deep down, that whatever waited in the darkness wasn't going to let her leave easily. And somehow, she knew this was only the beginning. The shadowed figure lingered in a corner of the basement, its presence impossible to define, yet undeniably aware of every movement Emma made. The cold pressed in from all directions, sharper now, biting into her skin as though the very air had turned hostile. Her hands shook as she gripped the railing, the wood slick with condensation, and her mind raced to comprehend what she was facing. The entity wasn't human. She knew that with a bone-deep certainty. Its shape seemed almost humanoid at first glance, but its edges wavered like smoke caught in a breeze, and its darkness swallowed every hint of light the basement provided. Emma took a hesitant step down the stairs, trying to keep her breathing steady. but the whispering had grown louder, more insistent. She could almost make out fragments of words, voices of long-dead people woven into the air. Stay. Belong forever. They circled her, echoing against the stone walls in a dissonant chorus. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she realized the entity was not just watching her. It was testing her, probing the limits of her fear. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Yet something in the house, something unseen, seemed to be subtly guiding her, pushing her toward the back of the basement. The shadows along the walls twisted, stretching and bending unnaturally, as if the house itself had begun to move. Emma's flashlight flickered violently, revealing glimpses of shapes that shouldn't exist. Hands, pale and skeletal, emerged from the stone floor, groping and grasping in futile desperation. The walls seemed to pulse, the symbols etched into them glowing faintly, almost alive. She stumbled backward, her foot catching on a broken step, and tumbled toward the far wall. The whispering intensified into a cacophony of voices, each one overlapping the next, forming a maddening hum that threatened to unravel her mind. A sudden, wet sound behind her made her whip around. The shadowed figure had moved closer, almost imperceptibly, but with a speed that made her stomach drop. Its form flickered, and for a split second, she saw something horrifying, a face, stretched and contorted, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce her soul. The air grew denser, colder, heavier, and she felt her legs weaken. Emma knew she could not let herself be paralyzed by fear. She forced herself to take another step, pressing toward the faint outline of a door partially hidden behind a stack of old crates. As she approached, a hand or something resembling one shot out from the darkness, brushing her shoulder with icy fingers. She screamed and ducked, adrenaline surging through her veins, and reached for the doorknob. It was slick, as if coated in a thin layer of black oil, but she turned it anyway. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, almost impossibly tight passage leading away from the basement. The faintest hint of moonlight spilled through the gap, and Emma felt a flicker of hope ignite. She slipped through, barely pausing to look back, and found herself in a narrow corridor lined with ancient wood and tangled cobwebs. The whispering followed her, now a low, menacing growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Every step she took echoed in the confined space, magnified into a rhythmic drumbeat of impending doom. Her heart hammered as she imagined the shadowed figure pursuing her, its presence just beyond her vision, waiting for a misstep. The corridor led to a staircase, descending further into darkness, but with a faint glow at the end. Emma hesitated, then forced herself down the steps, each one creaking under her weight. The air was thick with dampness and the scent of decay. Her flashlight flickered again, and she caught another glimpse of the figure at the top of the stairs, motionless, yet somehow closer than before. Her stomach churned as she realized the entity could warp distance and perception at will. It wasn't bound by physical space, it existed in the fear it generated. At the bottom of the stairs, Emma found the hidden door she had hoped for. It was small, partially obscured by hanging vines and fallen leaves that seemed out of place underground. She pushed it open and felt the chill of the outside air rush in, a sharp contrast to the oppressive darkness of the basement. The moonlight bathed the path ahead in a ghostly glow, revealing the twisted trees and dense mist of the forest beyond. She could almost feel freedom within reach, the normal world just beyond the threshold. Emma's relief was short-lived. The whispers surged again, louder and more urgent, now carrying a tone of anger, of ownership. "You can't leave. You belong here." The words clawed at her mind, threatening to pull her back, to tether her to the house forever. She forced herself to step through the door, the cool night air biting her skin. But as she reached the forest, the shadows seemed to stretch and reach for her legs, curling around her like serpents. Every instinct screamed for her to run, and she did, sprinting through the mist. branches tearing at her clothes and skin. Behind her, the house loomed, impossibly dark and silent. But she knew the figure was still there, watching, waiting. She could feel it in the chill that ran along her spine, in the oppressive weight pressing on her chest, in the whispering that refused to die down. The forest itself seemed alive, guiding her steps, but also testing her resolve. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made her jump, imagining the entity emerging to claim her. Finally, she burst into a small clearing, her lungs burning, her legs trembling. The mist rolled off the trees like a living thing, and for a moment, the forest seemed to pause, holding its breath. Emma allowed herself a shaky, short-lived moment of relief. She had escaped the basement, escaped the immediate threat of the shadowed figure. But in that fleeting moment, she realized something horrifying. The house was not gone. The entity was not gone, and Blackwood Hollow itself had not released her. It was alive, patient, and relentless. As she caught her breath, the whispers began again, softer this time, like a thread winding into her mind. She shook her head violently, trying to dislodge the sound, but it lingered. A reminder that she had been marked, that the shadowed figure had claimed a piece of her soul. The trees around her swayed as if acknowledging some unseen presence, and the fog thickened, curling around her like a living thing. The moonlight cast long, eerie shadows, and for the first time, Emma realized the depth of her peril. She wasn't just being watched, she was being hunted, and the entity had patience beyond anything she could comprehend. Emma's eyes scanned the clearing, searching for any sign of her friends. The mist was thick, obscuring the shapes of the forest, and every shadow seemed to twitch with movement. She called out, her voice shaking, but only the wind answered, carrying a faint echo of laughter that was not human. Panic surged, and she ran again, deeper into the forest, hoping to put distance between herself and the darkness. But deep down, she knew the truth. Blackwood Hollow was never going to let her go. As the night stretched on, Emma moved through the fog-shrouded trees, the whispering never ceasing. She stumbled onto an old, abandoned path, broken and overgrown, and for the first time, she realized the full scope of what had happened. The entity was patient, immortal in its hunger, waiting for the next victim to wander too close. And somewhere, in the shadowed distance, she felt its gaze lock on her, unblinking, unyielding. She could hear it whispering her name now, soft but insistent, promising that the house and its shadows would never release her fully. Even as she finally slowed, her legs aching, her chest heaving, she knew the entity had already won something. Her fear, her curiosity, her very soul had been imprinted on Blackwood Hollow, and the memory of the shadowed figure would haunt her forever. Somewhere deep in the mist, it waited, and it would never forget.
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.